The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Sporty's webinar, the first in our webinar series for 2015. On our topic this evening, which is flight training and the iPad. Very timely for many of you who undoubtedly received gifts during the holiday season related to the iPad. So we're very pleased that you can join us tonight. My name is Eric Radke. I'm Chief Instructor at Sporty's Academy, and I'm serving as your facilitator for the evening. So part of my duty is to explain and just run through a few housekeeping items, and then we're going to move very quickly to our expert presenters for this evening. First and foremost, please know that we are recording tonight's presentation, and we will make the entire video recording available free of charge and our webinar archive that will be available at sportys.com/webinars, the same page that you use to sign up for tonight. So if you do have to step away for any reason at all, do know that you can come back and at a later date review the presented material as many times as you'd like. Also, one of the benefits of being on live and joining us this evening is you do have the ability to submit questions via the GoToWebinar software. So feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation. I will collect those, and then towards the end of the presentation, we'll set aside some time where we can address those questions to our presenters. So we are very fortunate to have two very insightful experts, being that they are very much heavily involved in this technology and these uses in flight training and aviation, and that is iPad pilot news editor and senior Sporty's Academy flight instructor Bret Koebbe, and also flight school manager and vice president of flight education at Sporty's Academy, David Zitt. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Good evening. Bret, let me, before we get started, and this is going to be kind of a joint presentation, so Bret and David are going to trade off some and speak about various topics, but Bret, let me pose a question, I guess, to get things started this evening. A little bit maybe outside of what you had planned for tonight. So I know iPad Pilot News, of course, deals in all of what's new and tips and tricks and insight on using the iPad and all types of different flying, whether it's flight training, whether it's flying in the airplane. So being as involved in this topic as you are there some topics that are on your mind, something developing maybe that we don't know about yet? Is there something new? What's on your radar for 2015 that we can maybe be looking for? What type of insights do you have there?
Sure. So the main thing the iPad's providing these days is our digital charts, which is the biggest benefit to student pilots, having all that data organized on one device. But the trend we're seeing the last couple of years is the acceleration of third-party hardware accessories to go with the iPad, items that can take that chart viewer to the next level, things like in-flight weather accessories. The connectivity with the Apple Watch is going to be a big thing to pay attention to have more information at our fingertips, literally, with the connection to the iPad, obviously Apple developing that. And then other accessories I see down the road are in the works now that will be things that will fit in the cockpit, that will be helping us, like heads-up displays possibly, to give us more information that really focus the horsepower of the iPad's potential, but keep our eyes outside the cockpit, because that's really the most important thing, is that we don't let this become a distraction. So really starting to see companies put some money into the development and research into creating these items that take the iPad's apps and great technology, but still, as pilots, allow us to keep our eyes outside the window and stay focused on what's going on with the airplane.
Bret, thanks for that. That's, clearly the iPad as a standalone device is an extremely capable product. And then to hear about some of those insights and what's new, it's just, it's becoming like a fully integrated flight deck. David, if I could for a second, so I know you supervise all kind of flight training activity at a very busy flight school, that being Sporty's Academy at the Claremont County Airport, and have been doing so for a number of years. So let me ask you this, David, related to the iPad, how have the flight bags that, clients would be walking in and showing up to the flight school to go flying with, how have you seen that changed in the last few years? The bags are getting smaller, I presume.
Oh, it's amazing. Student pilots back in my day when I learned to fly, you'd carry around a briefcase, a backpack, and be lugging around 100 pounds of books and materials with you. Today, I rarely see a student walking around with anything more than a headset bag and an iPad and maybe a backpack at the absolute most. The transformation for what the iPad has done for lightening the load for students has been amazing. Just the ability to consolidate books alone kind of almost justifies the iPad a lot in terms of flight training. So it's been an amazing transformation, and the percentage of student pilots that are carrying nothing but their iPad and a headset bag these days is increasing dramatically. And we'll talk a lot about that tonight in the presentation and hopefully cover a few do's and don'ts to keep you out of trouble.
Dave, thanks for that. Without any further ado, I've taken enough time. Appreciate your patience. And Bret, I know we have a lot of info to cover, so I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you. Again, as Eric mentioned, work a lot of roles at Sporty's, primarily as editor of iPad Pilot News, which I'll cover here briefly, a great resource to jot down and take note of. I also oversee app development at Sporty's. I've been doing that since really the iPhone hit the scene in 2007. Sporty's has about 32 apps available now covering really focused on the flight training environment, and we'll cover some of those this evening. But it's been an interesting transition over the last several years, going from iPhone apps to iPad apps and really seeing that technology advance in both the software standpoint and then, as I mentioned earlier, the accessories that are becoming compatible with the iPad, the hardware part of it. And I also work as a CFI at Sporty as a flight instructor, so I have interaction with students on a daily basis and talking with them and seeing how they're using the iPad as the new go-to resource in flight training. Two free resources I do want you to jot down is the two blogs here that we produce. The first, learntoflyhere.com, a great resource to check in with during your training. Blogs updated nearly every week. Lots of videos here to help you with different aspects of your flight training and video tips, etc., and all kinds of other items. Completely free and always there to check out. The other item is the iPadPilotNews.com, a blog that we run at Sporty's. And here we really cover everything iPad, anything from apps to accessories. We do reviews. Anything that new comes out, you're going to see great coverage on that. And on that site, you can sign up for a email service. We'll send out every 2 weeks that sends all the latest articles right to your email in a nice, convenient format. So highly recommend checking that out. We've got an archive there of probably 300 articles or so, covering anything from basics of how to control the iPad to advanced tips on how to run the latest features in all the applications. So a wealth of resources you can search through as well to find more information on some of the topics we cover this evening. So here's a basic overview of what we're going to cover tonight. As Eric mentioned, I will cover the first half, and Dave will continue on the second half, going into the flight training and tips and things he sees as the flight school manager at Sporty's Academy. But we're going to cover some basics about why the iPad even fits so well in aviation in the first place, and why it's really the first non-aviation device, tablet device, to grab a strong presence in the aviation market. And for those that are looking to purchase an iPad, we'll cover just the quick basics of which one and model works best in the airplane. We're going to cover the iPad as a ground preparation tool, as an electronic book reader, things like that. Of course, flying with the iPad, that's where the popularity of the device really took off as an electronic chart reader and multi-function display in the airplane. When and how to start using the iPad during flight training, very important topic to review for the student pilots. And then we're also going to get into some topics related to instrument training that are unique to that aspect of using the iPad. And then Dave's going to conclude talking about how the iPad can be used on the FAA check ride. Again, some do's and don'ts and considerations there so that you don't catch the instructor off guard and that you're properly prepared for all the scenarios that can happen during the check ride. To get going and help us get a gauge of the audience, Eric's going to put a poll up here to gauge the iPad experience level in the group tonight, which can help us tailor kind of what we talk about this evening based on the experience level in the group here.
Yeah, Bret, the poll's in the field, so I'll give everyone an opportunity to read through the choices there, some broad categories, and just give us a better feel for how the audience lays out tonight. Bret, it looks like the overwhelming majority, and it's kind of a split between these two groups, but we either have a group that owns the iPad but just learning, and then we have kind of an equal amount that are experienced. Only a very few are still in the consideration phase, but we do have a few.
Okay. Good info. So the first section here I want to talk about is why pilots love the iPad. Because again, it really wasn't designed for aviation. It was designed by Apple as an ebook or a video player or a web browser. But the aviation app developers really saw the capability in this device and created a lot of very, very sophisticated apps that rival and in some cases even exceed the capabilities of certified avionics in our airplanes. And that's the beauty of this device, is it's a non-certified device, but that's also a benefit in that app developers can release new features on a monthly basis without having to deal with FAA certification issues and other hurdles that typically go in with aviation software and hardware. So really the device is what you make of it, and from an aviation standpoint, we're looking at a wide range of possibilities. And from here on, we're going to focus mainly as a flight training standpoint, just a wide range of options that it can do for you. Digital charts and weather services, an aviation book reader, weight and balance applications to do all that computation electronically, E6B flight computer, GPS navigation. That's a big thing, especially as you get your certificate, to have as a backup navigator in your airplane at all times to show your position on the moving map, an electronic logbook, and a flight data recorder that we're going to talk about that can really help you out with your lessons to help analyze your progress and analyze your flights. When we put all that together, we really consider the iPad as what's called an electronic flight bag. And that name couldn't be more fitting because it's basically taking all these resources that we used to lug around in a canvas flight bag and put it all into one convenient tablet device that we can carry with us. And best of all, we can purchase it for under $500. So very, very inexpensive item in the scheme of things for all that it can do. So there's a very shallow learning curve. Again, I compare that to other avionics training. There's not much to learning the iPad, and many people these days have an iPhone. And so if you know how to work an iPhone, there's probably a good chance you can figure out the iPad pretty quickly. It's not like old computer software and technology in the early 2000s that was difficult to master and understand. And that's important in aviation because we're going to be using this in an airplane with a lot of other demands going on. So we want a device that is user-friendly and reliable. Probably a good chance you may already have an iPad, as we've seen from the group tonight. But the good thing here is you can use this for other capabilities. It's not like buying a dedicated aviation GPS and then sticking it away when you're not flying. You can take this with you as you travel to read the news, check your email, etc. It's a great device to consume aviation training material and aviation video training courses. One of the primary features when Apple developed the product was to serve as a movie player, a video player. And there's a lot of great aviation video training programs and test prep programs that are made just for the iPad. So it's really going to help you out to prepare on the ground as well as an in-flight resource. It takes flight planning to the next level. Before, we really didn't have touchscreen devices. We had to rely on mouse clicks and keyboards and all that. Well, now we can interact with our screen and touch our routes to go around weather, which makes for a very, very nice in-flight and pre-flight weather planning tool to pick our routing and to look at charts and look at all the different variables of flight planning, which really gives us more information and, in my opinion, makes our flight planning safer along the way. And this is the number one reason that the iPad initially became so popular in 2010 was its capability to serve as a digital chart reader, meaning that we can store all our paper sectional equivalents on the iPad and have the entire country at our fingertips. And what really comes out to a fraction of the cost of what the paper equivalent would cost. So a very nice, big, full-screen navigation device. So given that most of the group tonight has the iPad and is familiar, we're not going to spend too much time here, but I do want to cover some basics for those that are still looking to buy an iPad. Really, you're looking at this point at the full-size 10-inch iPad Air or the iPad Mini. Either way, both devices run the same applications. They both run them very well. Biggest difference is the obvious physical difference in screen size, and in certain cockpits the iPad Mini is going to be a better fit if it's a tighter cockpit or you don't have the places to mount it. So that's really going to be one of your biggest considerations is what kind of airplane you're flying in. If you're in a 152, 172 Cirrus, the full-size iPad is just fine. There's plenty of room for it. But if you are in a tighter, maybe an LSA type airplane that doesn't have quite the amount of room, maybe a tail dragger like a Piper Cub, an iPad Mini might be the better option. 3 storage options now. 64 gigabyte is what I would recommend as a starting point. If you were to download charts for the entire United States, you're looking at about 9 gigabytes. So that would easily fit on the 16 gigabyte version, but there are other features that these applications that we're going to talk about this evening can provide for you for international charts. And then think of other things down the road that you might want to add, such as terrain awareness or synthetic vision, other books and software that you want to add to your device to really make it a full-featured product. And so for that reason, I think the extra $100 is worthwhile to spend to go with the 64 gigabyte version. Then the next thing to consider when purchasing, after you decide if you want the full size or the mini, is whether or not you want the Wi-Fi only model or the model that has the LTE cellular data service, which would be the AT&T or the Verizon cell data service. The big benefit there is that that LTE version has a built-in GPS chip, and the benefits there are obvious in that it can determine your position and show your aircraft's position on the moving map displays that the iPad can provide. The big takeaway here I want to point out is that if you do go with the Wi-Fi with LTE and the GPS, is that you don't need to activate that AT&T or Verizon service for the GPS to work. It's a built-in chip, completely separate from that cellular data service, but it does provide you the benefit of having position data. And the big thing to remember too, as many have already probably realized, is that you're not going to get reliable cellular data service in the airplane. Once you get above 1,000 or 2,000 feet or so, you're not going to have the ability to make cell phone calls or retrieve that cellular data service for position information. And that's where that GPS can really come in handy to locate your position on the iPad. As we'll talk about later, part of your consideration here is that you can also add a GPS chip from a third-party accessory manufacturer. So there are GPS accessory options if you don't go with the Wi-Fi plus GPS option. A couple of the other kind of housekeeping things you want to cover when considering using the iPad in the airplane. Some limitations. While it is a very reliable device, great battery life, there are some things you want to consider when you're moving into this technology. And really any technology that has a battery, internal, a lithium-ion battery, has temperature limits, and those are in place to protect that battery from overheating. So the temperature range roughly 32 degrees to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's published by Apple as the limits. And what will happen is if you do get too hot, say you leave the iPad in the cockpit after you land and you head into the FBO to check out the facilities, if that cockpit gets pretty hot in there without any airflow, you can come back to the airplane and see that screen there that tells you that your iPad has reached the maximum temperature. And it's basically shutting down at that point to protect that internal battery. So the important thing there is just, again, to remember to take care of it like any other kind of electronic device. Keep airflow over it if you can in the airplane. If you're flying down on hot summer days, down at low altitude, doing some low altitude maneuvering, keep in mind that you want to keep it out of direct sunlight. Another suggestion here also, as we talk about mounting options for the device in the airplane, is that using things like fabric cases around the iPad limits cooling around it as well. So you might want to have the iPad out more and exposed to the ambient air to prevent it from shutting down. There's a published max altitude of 10,000 feet. Where this one, with the temperature, it will shut down. If you get to 12 or 13,000 feet altitudes, it's probably not going to be an issue. The biggest thing here, again, is a cooling issue with less air molecules up at the higher altitudes. But it is a limitation you want to be aware of if you are flying in unpressurized aircraft at the higher altitudes. GPS interference, and this goes with any electronic device you bring into the airplane, that you do want to double check, especially for those working on their instrument rating when doing instrument training, that the device is not going to interfere with any of your primary navigation equipment. And in my experience, the biggest cause for this, and it goes for your cell phone too, is that when the device tries to connect to the ground towers, the AT&T or Verizon services, that cellular data service can trigger some feedback and interference with your panel mount GPS receiver. So the biggest way to try to eliminate that, and again, this is a good tip for your cell phones too, is to make sure to put those into airplane mode when you get up in the airplane to try to prevent that from being an issue. And last, the screen glare on the iPad. It's a bright, colorful screen, very vibrant and easy to read in an office or a controlled lighting environment. But when you get in the airplane with a lot of sunlight, and especially depending on how open your canopy is and how much light it lets in, the iPad can be a little bit tricky to read sometimes if it has a direct sunlight hitting it. So take that into consideration if you're in a bubble canopy like a Diamond or maybe an RV. But there are screen glare filters you can apply to the iPad. Check those out. We have a couple at Sporty's that we offer that I fly with and personally really like. Works really well, and it also prevents the finger print dirt buildup on the screen as well. That's one thing, and Eric mentioned earlier, I expect to see some improvements in the technology used on the screens going forward. I'm sure many have seen the commercials for the Kindle and Amazon poking fun at the iPad and how it's basically unreadable if you're outdoors. And in the airplane it's better, you do have some coverage there, but just again be aware of that potential on the bright sunny days. So let's move over now and talk about how you can use the iPad as a flight student on the ground and the capabilities it can provide. And the first consideration is an electronic book reader. There's a wealth of books that we have to accumulate and study throughout our flight training, ranging from all the FAA handbooks, the federal aviation regulations, and then its counterpart, often bundled in the actual same book, is the Aeronautical Information Manual. You have your aircraft POH, avionics pilot's guides, and FAA practical test standards. And that's just a few samples of books that we all used to carry around and really load up those flight bags. Well, the nice thing is now with the iPad's capability as that electronic reader is that we can load all those copies of those manuals and books onto the iPad in digital version. So as a flight student, you're a lot of times interested in airplane flying handbook, the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge, aviation weather services, the list goes on of FAA publications that we study through our training. And the great thing is the FAA puts those available on their website, all completely free as PDFs. Free to download. You can read those on your computer, any other device. But what you can do here is with the iPad is use a PDF viewer application. iBooks, for example, which is Apple's book reader, can take those PDFs and organize them nicely on your iPad. Another option is the Good Reader application. That's what I'm showing there in the screenshot. One of my favorites. It's about, I think, $5 now, $5 or $10, but you can organize all your PDFs and really any kind of media format in this application. And you can put bookmarks in, you can highlight, you can search, all kinds of different features that makes this really practical as a book reader. And then also you can download the FARs for free. Again, the Aeronautical Information Manual is available. All these important resources that we used to accumulate in book format, you can now put on your iPad. It makes it really practical and easy to keep organized and review. And for those flying Cessna aircraft, they also make their aircraft operating manuals available on the Cessna support website. And again, things like your performance charts and systems, etc., you can read all on your iPad whenever you have it with you. One app I will point out that takes the FAR and AIM information and puts it into a nice app format is the Sporty's FAR AIM app. And this is an example where you might want to pay a little bit of a premium, the $10 or so, to have all the information in a dedicated app format. It makes it much easier to navigate and search for the information rather than just looking through PDFs. So, and same thing with the Airplane Flying Handbook and a couple of the others. If you search in the App Store, you'll probably find dedicated apps of those books in the $3 to $5 range, which can make it a little bit easier for you to read that data if you don't want to search for the PDF itself on the FAA's website. Again, I mentioned the iPad's a great study tool from a video standpoint, and our Sporty's Learn to Fly course application is really the all-in-one training program to help you prepare during your flight training. And what this can allow you to do, and Dave's going to talk a little bit more about this later on, is allow you to study away from the airport, to review your flight maneuvers, to prepare for your knowledge test by taking practice test questions, and do it all on your own time, so that when you get to the airport, you can really make more of your time with your flight instructor, having seen the material and having studied it in advance. And this really takes the heart of Sporty's 15-hour training course and makes it all accessible in a nice video format on your iPad in a dedicated application. And once you complete that program, a really nice benefit there is after you take some practice tests and watch all the video is that the application can give you your knowledge test endorsement right from the app itself. So again, you can minimize that extra time on the ground with your instructor and really focus on the important topics when you meet with them, such as flying the airplane and any other kind of knowledge subject areas you want to cover at that point. Another area where the app has really taken over is the E6B flight computer. Obviously on the left side is the original E6B from World War II, which then through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s evolved into the electronic handheld flight computer. And then on the far right is the app version of the E6B flight computer. And for now, though, the electronic one in the middle is still an important item that you're still going to need because when it comes time to take your FAA knowledge test and you need to answer those performance questions and flight planning questions, you can't take your iPad or iPhone into the testing center. So you're still going to want to have that electronic flight computer to answer those questions. And it's still a good resource to keep with you at all times as another backup computational device. But what you'll find over time is that when you have your E6B app on your iPhone or iPad, it's always with you. It's easy to make those computations or quick conversions that you need that pop up from time to time. And a couple of them out there, again, I mentioned the Sporty E6B, and then another nice one is called the E6B Pro Pad. This is produced by a company called Geronimo. We'll talk a little bit more about them. A great high-quality app developer that produces some really neat apps. And as you can see, the example here, they've taken the traditional manual E6B and converted it into the electronic format, so you get a little bit of both types of technology there. Some other app options, again, that can really take advantage of the capability of the product. Again, on the left is the Geronimo Performance Pad app, and they make a wide variety of these based on your aircraft model. So if you're flying the Cessna 172R or the 172S, you can buy that individual application. It's going to have all the unique performance data, weight and balance data specific to that airplane. As you can see in the example there, it's doing a great job of helping you to visualize your takeoff distance with nice slider controls and all kinds of other information that makes it very easy to compute the various calculations before a flight. And then on the right side is a dedicated weight and balance calculator called the Aviation W and B calculator. And again, allows you to enter in all those numbers and visualize to see how your weight and balance performance calculations are coming out with a typical graph there also to show you visually how things are looking. Of course, there are checklist applications for the iPad. And this is one you may want to start off with a paper. You don't want to get too overwhelmed with the iPad in the cockpit. But as you become more comfortable and you have it with you, a checklist application is a natural evolution of a way to use technology in the airplane. And the way these usually work is you'll get the actual application for free, and then once you're in the application, you can buy your specific aircraft model. Again, whether it's a Skyhawk or a Piper, a Cirrus, etc. And you can also modify the checklist. So if something's a little bit different about your operation or your aircraft, you can actually make modifications to the checklist to suit it towards your operation. And then, of course, logbooks have gone to the iPad as well in digital app formats. And these are the two big ones here, Logbook Pro and Log 10 Pro. I would say I'd see most people using the Log 10 Pro application. It even includes the ability for your instructor to make digital signatures. But the nice thing now is if, as a student pilot, if you start with one of these digital logbooks, you're going to have that for your whole career then. So it's a nice way to stick with one format going forward. And it's going to help you with your currency also once you get your certificate to tell you when you're night proficient or how many landings you've done in the last 90 days, etc. So it's a great way to take the data and make it very useful to you as a pilot to see how you're flying and currency is progressing. And of course, weather applications ranging from everyday public consumer type weather, such as AccuWeather for forecasts for cities and temperatures. And as we drill down to the WSI Pilot Brief Optima, that's a very pilot-centered weather application that's going to deliver all your aviation-specific weather products, METARs, TAFs, AirMets, etc. One I have there is called MyRadar, especially for those flying in the south and in the summertime with the convective weather. I've really found in my flying career that sometimes it's nice just to have a radar application. Just about all the applications, weather-wise and charting applications, will have radar built into them. But if you just want to go to a really simple, very crisp weather radar picture, MyRadar is really a good one to check out. And AeroWeather does something similar for METAR and TAFs. They have an AeroWeather Lite version, which is a free application that if you just want to check out the local weather report at your airport, type in the identifier and the application will provide you with that information. Okay, so now we kind of have a basis of how we can use the iPad during our ground preparation and to really build up the electronic flight bag. We're going to talk about how the iPad can serve in the airplane, which is really probably why most of us are interested long-term, at least as pilots, in purchasing the product. Biggest benefit here is that we're going to save paper, weight, and money by having all of our charts on the iPad. If you think back, if you've ever purchased sectionals, they range from $9 to $10 for one area. You might need 3 or 4 of these depending on where you're flying. You have to update those every 6 months. So you can start to spend a lot of money on that, and then the airport facility directories, terminal area charts, world aeronautical charts. We have to buy all those separate individual charts, or we can move to a single application on the iPad that delivers all that data to us for a very minimal annual subscription fee. And that's really where the money savings comes in, is that we can get all this data delivered to us for much, much less than the paper equivalent. And there's a common question out there, and sometimes debated, although it really shouldn't be debated because it's a pretty clear answer, is that yes, you can use the iPad as a paper chart replacement, meaning that you're completely legal, whether you're a student pilot, a private pilot, whatever it may be, to use the iPad with current digital data on the iPad and not have any paper charts in the airplane. Now, again, as Dave talks a little bit later on, you're going to see there's a transition plan there. You don't just want to go right to the iPad and just a sectional on it. But from a legal standpoint, that's completely okay to do. There are, of course, some legal considerations anytime you're dealing with portable electronic devices in the airplane. Again, whether that's your cell phone, a handheld Garmin GPS, or tonight we're talking about the iPad. And that's just a quick reminder from FAR 91.21 on portable electronic devices to verify that it's not going to cause any interference with your avionics or systems in the airplane. Now, there's 2 advisory circulars that pertain to iPad flying. And advisory circulars, if you're not familiar, are really pretty easy to read, straightforward documents. They're outside the scope of the actual federal aviation regulations, but they still dictate how we can do different operations. In this case, this 91-78 pertains to electronic flight bags and the use of them. And again, when we talk about electronic flight bags, we're talking about the iPad itself. And so one you want to become familiar with, again, no matter what your pilot level is, if you're a student pilot or working on an instrument rating or already certificated, is that Advisory Circular 91-78. And you can download that, again, free from the FAA website. Just do a search on their homepage and it'll pop up. The other one I want to bring up, and I'm not going to spend any time on it though, but again, just to be familiar with it, is the Advisory Circular 120-76. And that applies to commercial operations, so the airline operators, the charter jet operators, when they're using the iPad. And it's more important to be aware of it just so you know that it does not apply to you. It does have more stringent requirements when using the iPad. But again, the important takeaway is that those particular requirements don't apply to the Part 91 piston general aviation operations that we're focused on this evening. So diving into that Advisory Circular 91-78 a little closer, they consider the iPad as a Class 1 electronic flight bag. And again, Class 1, don't get too worked up in the details, but that basically just means it's any device off the shelf of a consumer store, so an iPad or an Android tablet. Your iPhone is also considered an electronic flight bag when it has the proper resources installed on it. But it has a couple takeaways that I think are worth covering and that are actually pretty practical as well. It says to use this device, you must have the functional equivalent of the paper reference material. Pretty much common sense. You have to have a digital sectional on there. And that's where apps like ForeFlight, Garmin Pilot, WingX Pro that we're going to talk about come in handy. They say that a backup source is recommended, but not required. And they don't go into too much specifics on the backup source. It could be paper charts or possibly a second electronic flight bag, such as, again, another iPhone or an iPad. Makes mention of the electronic interference requirement, that it does not interfere with your communication or navigation equipment in the airplane. And they also say that you should first use it during an evaluation period with paper. And that's exactly what Dave's going to talk about, is how to achieve that transition period during your flight training and cross-country flight planning. So as we mentioned, we need that functional equivalent of the paper reference material, and that's where the aviation apps come into play there, that take that data and put it onto your iPad in a nice, convenient format. And really the big 3 out there these days are ForeFlight Mobile, Garmin Pilot, and WingX Pro. And what these applications are going to do, and they all have very similar capabilities, is they're going to take all that charting data, weather information, flight planning, terrain and hazard awareness that we're seeing in that picture there, so color coding terrain imagery, fuel prices, FBO directory, really a comprehensive suite of information that you're going to be able to use to plan your flights on the ground when you're preparing for a flight, and then use it in the airplane for a in-flight resource for information. One caveat I want to point out, and this is especially for those just getting into iPad flying, is that when you download that application, it's going to be relatively small, probably 50 to 100 megabytes or so. And that's mainly because it's strictly just the application shell. It's not going to include all the charts and all the aviation data. So when you first load it, you're going to see sectionals, you're going to see airport facility directory information, but that data is coming in real time from the internet. It's not downloading and saving it to the device. So if you were to take that iPad, install that application, and then go flying right away, away from an internet connection, you're going to see that screen there that says sectional not saved, see downloads. And that's going to be your big oops and takeaway moment that, hey, I probably should have downloaded that data ahead of time. So as you get these applications installed and check them out, make sure you download the regions or states and types of charts that you need for your flight. And each one does it a little bit differently, but it breaks it down based on VFR and IFR charts that you might need for your particular mission. So again, I mentioned those three. How do you decide which one is going to be best for you, since they all contain pretty much similar information? The best news here is that you can download all three for free. They all have 30-day trials where you can use pretty much all the features free of charge to give it a good test run. So sit down with it at your house or at the flight school, in the cafe, wherever it might be, and try out the features. Think about using it in the airplane, how it feels, how easy it is to operate, how you like the controls, how it looks. All different things are different to different people. Kind of the Coke Pepsi argument. What somebody might like in one, the other might like in another. So try them all out and see what you like. They all roughly range in the $75 to $100 per year for the entry-level package, which is really all you need at first. That's going to give you everything, weather, charts, etc., that you need as a flight student, and both for private pilot and instrument pilot training. And think about customer support too. It doesn't take long to read some reviews on these products online to see if you do have an issue, how the support department helps out with that. So I want to touch on the GPS briefly. Again, the model with the LTE, the Verizon, AT&T, Sprint service, has the built-in GPS, but you do have the option of adding a GPS. And there's really kind of two categories of products there when you want to add that GPS chip to your iPad for navigation. And that's the Bad Elf plug-in model that you see at the top right that plugs right into the bottom of your either Lightning connector port or the 30-pin connector. Or you have the option for a Bluetooth wireless receiver, again made by companies Dual, Garmin, which many of us know, and Bad Elf. And if Bad Elf is that term is new to you, that's probably one of the leading GPS manufacturers for iPad. So it's kind of a funny name, but a very reputable GPS manufacturer for the product. One item I will point out, if you're looking for the top of the line GPS receiver with some bonus features, is the Stratus product. And this is really any ADS-B receiver. We call it ADS-B because that's part of the ground-based weather system that the product can receive. But what this will allow you to do as you evolve in your training and start flying as a private pilot, instrument pilot, is to receive that same weather data that you receive with an internet connection in the air in flight. And that's what the Stratus will allow you to do. And as again, that picks up that information as part of the ADS-B FAA weather system. The other consideration is that you want to secure the iPad. You don't just want to stick it on your lap when you're flying. Of course, you're in turbulence and a lot of motion in the airplane, so consider some kind of mounting option when you do use it, whether that might be a knee board is a good option, or a mount that can affix it to the yoke, or the maybe a side window with a suction cup. But check out the Sporty's website. We've got a whole slew of pages dedicated to mounting options, probably 15 or 20 different knee boards there. You can look through ranging from slim, unobtrusive knee boards to full-featured with pockets, etc., that are built into it. The last thing I want to mention is just also consider a backup power option for your iPad. Obviously, we're depending on a battery here. And in the iPad in the airplane, you're going to get about 4 to 6 hours of use when you're using it with a GPS source. So if you're doing multiple lessons in a given day or need extra time for long cross countries, consider either on the right side there is a cigarette lighter that can export the USB information and power data to your iPad just via your simple USB cable. I think that product's around $15. So if you do have the USB port, a very good solution for keeping your iPad charged. And if you don't, there's a wide variety of backup batteries that can provide backup power to your iPad through USB ports. Great insurance to keep on your iPad in the event that the power fails, and a good peace of mind also for the rest of your flying career as you use the product. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave now, who's going to kind of move into the flight training section and give you some tips on how that integrate your iPad into your flight training and throughout your lessons.
Well, thanks, Bret. Really appreciate that. A lot of good tips in there. As Bret had mentioned as we started at the beginning of the program, my name is David Zitt. I'm Vice President of Flight Education for Sporty's Academy and a CFI myself, and I wanted to thank you all once again for staying with us and joining with us this evening. I've been a CFI for approximately 15 years, and there's one thing we know here at Sporty's Academy, and that is we love to teach. A lot of our products and everything we talk about tonight really comes from the desire to spread the information in aviation out there into the community. Because there's a lot of information that's changing. Bret's already talking about what's going to be happening hopefully this year and a lot of things to come. And staying, in touch with what's going on in the industry is really key for, keeping your flying safety. As far as my CFI teaching background, I do a lot of specialization in glass cockpits and technology and the integration thereof, and how we can incorporate safety using those devices. So with that, I'm going to call in to Eric and see if we can't get a poll up here about where everyone is in your flight training.
David, we have the poll in the field, and we'll give our attendees just a minute here to answer. All right, Dave, it looks like nearly half are already a pilot and beginning to use the iPad. We have about another 20% that have started training and are kind of in that primary phase working towards the first solo, and then slightly less than 20% working towards an instrument rating.
Excellent. That's a nice, good split in the group, and we'll cover a good topic set for everybody. I think there's something in here for a lot. But let's start with the first group here, with those of you who are just starting to use the iPad beginning your flight training. The biggest question we often get, and this applies to really any type of technology, but the iPad is obviously a big piece to this, is when should I start using the iPad in my flight training? And this is one of those things that if you've yet to choose on a flight school, if you're just getting started, this is something to bring up with that flight school in the beginning. You don't want to be halfway through your training, you've spent all this money in investments on products like the iPad, and only to find out that your particular flight school doesn't enjoy the integration of technology. This is something to bring up right up front. The next piece I would point to is the importance of using it during your flight training in the early stage. Now, with that statement, what I want to say is kind of the opposite. I want you to focus on your flight training in that first phase, right up until about the point where you solo the aircraft. Up until that moment, your time really needs to be dedicated outside the cockpit and focusing on the look, feel, and touch of flying the airplane. It's not to say the iPad isn't going to assist you on the ground, and it will, and we'll talk about how to do that safely, but we don't want it to be in the cockpit with us during those critical first few hours learning how to fly the aircraft. The best time that we can begin to use this, if we're starting to work our way in the iPad into the flight training, is to start learning the basics of cross-country flight planning using the old methods. And that would be paper charts, a good old plotter, an E6B, electronic or manual, either one, because these methods not only are going to provide for a great background that's going to serve you later on in flight training in the event that something happens to your iPad, but also simply the knowledge that comes with the older styles. Not to mention the other piece, which Bret alluded to earlier, that this technology is still required by the practical test standard and the FAA knowledge test. You can't walk in with your iPad and your weight and balance calculator there with you to go in and sit down at the written knowledge test. You have to use these older methods. And I'm still a big proponent. As much as I use technology, I still teach my students these methods first because I think it really helps you long-term in your career. With the use of technology of any kind, cell phones or otherwise, we see a lot of states out there that have banned the use of cell phones while driving. A lot of technology, texting, and all these kind of situations. Technology represents the same type of distraction in the flight cockpit. And that, once again, can be anything from your iPad to your phone to your GPS to anything that you're bringing in with you. And when you're flying the airplane, remember that aviating is the most important first step, as I'm sure you've probably heard that adage from your flight instructor at some point. So if we started to say some of the ground rules, and we want to go ahead and begin using that iPad, where can I start? What's the best place to begin? And the answer is simply a chart viewer. We want to use that iPad day one starting as you're going to begin to integrate that as a basic chart viewer. We're not going to do any of the advanced calculations. We're not going to do any advanced features. We just want to look at it as a chart. Why? Because that's going to allow us to get familiar with the device and technology, its limitations, its drawbacks, and also the apps, what they have to offer us, the features, and just the basic familiarity of getting in and out of what we're trying to do. When we try to add too much onto that is when we start getting ourselves in a little bit of trouble. You don't want to be using these devices as a navigational crutch. Okay, when we're dealing with as I mentioned earlier, the paper charts and getting out your plotter and figuring out distances and times with a manual E6B or electronic E6B, that's important information because that's going to come handy later on in your mind. If we rely on the iPad or any other digital technology that just makes all of our calculations for us, we're going to be omitting some of that key knowledge that's going to come back to help us hopefully at some point in the future. Nothing wrong at all, as Bret mentioned earlier as well, nothing wrong with bringing those paper charts with you in addition to your iPad. If you're not a large tech-savvy person, computers sometimes frustrate you. You can put your hand up virtually in the air there. I'm with you. So as a result, you don't want to put the technology as being your only source of information, especially not in the beginning. So when do I want to go ahead and use this iPad as my primary source? When, okay, I've gotten past the basic charting phase. Okay, Dave, when can I make the switch? I love it. It's the best technology I've ever had in my life. I can't imagine living without it. When can I do it? Well, the answer there really is a discussion. There's no right or wrong answer, and it's something that you need to have the support of your flight instructor with you. This is not something you want to do by yourself. You want to discuss the options, timing with your flight instructor during those earlier phases of training. Post-solo, but when is the right time to begin switching that as our primary source of information? A couple of things people say, do I want to do it early or do I want to do it late? Well, here's just a few little, snippets that I would give you. And the advantage of switching a little bit earlier in your flying, once you have all the basics down with the paper, is that you're going to get a little more experience with your iPad and your app, particularly because you're going to have a little more time to use it over the years before you're flying truly by yourself without your flight instructor. But with every pro in aviation, we know there's a con. The downside to obviously doing that early is that you could potentially deal with an overdependence issue, where if you've been using it for so long and that's the only technology you've used, you're not going to have a lot of other methods at your disposal if and when something happened. I mean, it could be something as simple as the battery going dead, or it could be something more catastrophic where the device itself fails. If you wanted to transition a little bit later, a little bit closer to your check ride or maybe even post-check ride, there's an advantage there is that you've got a large, broad background of knowledge. Obviously, you've had to do it other mechanisms and other ways. That's going to come to service you, in the future. The downside is, of course, that if you've done it, especially post-check ride, you do have the possibility of unfamiliarity with the app. And making sure that you know these apps inside and out, every feature, even if you think you're not going to use the feature, knowing it inside and out is absolutely vital, and you're going to hear me say it again probably 2 or 3 other times in this webinar, that you cannot begin to use this device and technology as a primary source until you truly feel comfortable with what you have in your hands. Supplemental chart data that we have in the apps are tremendous. We have so much information at our fingertips. The only catch is you got to know where to find it. So that goes back to just knowing where all your app data is and how to locate it quickly. The airport facility directory, sectional legends, TAC charts, you name it. It's all in there if you download it for some apps. Some apps have it automatically. Other ones you have to go tell it, I want you to download this information. So get familiar with your app. The real one that everyone likes to focus to is how can I make this flight planning easier? For those of you who are already licensed pilots or for those of you in training that have gotten to your cross-country phases, you know that those grids that you put out and the dead reckoning calculations every 10 miles doing 110 knots and you do the calculate, it takes you a long time. As a flight instructor, I understand. Trust me, I've helped many students through it. But there is benefit to learning that information because the iPad will simplify all of that. It will help you tremendously, but it's going to simplify the calculation, not the decision that you have to make based upon that information. It's going to give you information, not insight, is kind of how I tell it to most of my students. So don't expect that just because you plug in a flight plan to your iPad that suddenly it's going to go ahead and tell you how to get there. Yeah, it's got a course chart and a number, but it's not going to have all the rest of the information you need. The iPads, depending on which app you have, the dead reckoning, which is the big piece in terms of time, fuel, distance, those are just tremendous. I can't speak enough volumes as to how nice that is to punch in that information. The only downside that I want to bring back is a couple things that you were taught early on by your flight instructor. Number one, winds aloft information. Most of the apps nowadays bring in winds aloft information so that it calculates appropriately your ground speed, which is vital to actually knowing how much fuel you're going to burn. But the downside is if you're doing your planning in advance, you know, 2 days in advance, 3 days in advance, the app likely will not have that winds aloft information, but the internet or other FAA briefing sources may have that. So you might be able to have to go out and get the information separately from your app. Your aircraft performance information, you want to make sure and tailor that to your airplane and consider climb profiles, descent profiles, because it's different. Some of the apps, when you give it a distance, say 50 nautical miles, it assumes that you're doing cruise speeds across the entire 50 nautical miles, when in fact, obviously, you know you've got a climb and a descent in there. And then some of the ones that are a little more advanced, like ForeFlight, which I use a lot of examples in my screenshots here, that has a lot of information for stock planning information that you can tailor to your aircraft specifically. You can also do a lot of terrain information in terms of helping you plan some altitude information, making sure that you're over the obstacles and anything that's along your way. As Bret mentioned, how do you have a backup plan with the system? You need to make sure that you're not solely relying upon your iPad as a singular source. If you have paper charts still with you, the big thing I like to see my students with is marking of the checkpoints. If you're going to do a cross-country, for example, marking the checkpoints can sometimes be challenging on the digital apps. You can do it. Your flight instructor hopefully will be able to help you or learn your app sufficiently. You can get that information, but sometimes it's just easier to get out the pen on the old sectional. Carrying a second iPad is obviously a great backup, a little pricey for some people. If you already own an iPhone, great advantage here is that most of the time your apps will work on both devices. And then, as Bret mentioned, the worst failure of all, the most common one, is running out of battery. So just make sure and plan ahead with those charging accessories that Bret had talked about. When we switch into the world of weather planning information really kind of breaks down into two groups for me. The first group is the dedicated weather apps. These are the ones that we'd mentioned earlier, things like AccuWeather, MyRadar. These are pure weather information apps. They work great on the ground. They're fantastic for pre-flight planning and information, but they tend to fall short on both aviation interest as well as anything that we can really use in the cockpit. Now compare that to the in-app weather services, things that are coming from your ForeFlight or your Garmin app or your WingX Pro. Those are going to carry some information with you such that it's a little more aviation tailored and you're going to be able to travel with it in the cockpit. It doesn't mean it's going to be updated in the cockpit. It just means the information is a little bit more readily available. Moving on with the weather planning, a big topic a lot of people have is about official weather briefings. Do I still need to make the telephone call to 1-800-WX brief, Dave? The answer is no, not really. Most apps, or if you're going online even, you can get an official weather briefing from most sources these days. For example, ForeFlight, they log all the information that you're getting off the app, so that information is creating that trail if you're looking for that. Not to mention the information they're giving you is coming direct from the same weather sources that you're getting from Lockheed Martin Flight Service. Many of the apps, like ForeFlight, for example, do offer full weather briefings, the same information you'd be getting from the telephone, directly from Flight Service itself. They send the information to Lockheed Martin. It comes back via the app. Tremendous integration. Can't speak enough about that. Some of the apps still use dulots out there. If that's fine too, obviously just a little bit more antiquated in the data, but it's still useful. TFRs and NOTAMs, as a flight instructor, I can't caution everybody enough out there about the importance of checking and updating TFR and NOTAMs before you leave. These apps have tremendous integration for that data. Know what your app can and cannot do in terms of showing what's out there to keep you safe. Speaking of what's out there and keeping things current, I'd like to bring you aware, if you're not aware of this service, it's by Lockheed Martin Flight Service, by the 1-800-WX people. They have a system called ACAS, or the Adverse Condition Alerting System. Fantastic thing. You can sign up for it online. If you go to Lockheed Martin's website for Flight Service, you can type in some contact information. When you do your briefings through Flight Service, which ForeFlight, for example, will allow you to do, if any of the conditions change from the last time you had a weather briefing that is in the adverse category, things like airmets, sigmets, convective sigmets, TFRs, etc., it's going to send you that notification via text message or an email or directly through the app, depending upon which preference you have. That is huge. When you think about, I got my briefing 2-3 hours ago, and all of a sudden there's an update to my airmet, or there's a new TFR that's out there, what a benefit for safety that's going to come right back to you. And that's really just kind of helping you stay in touch and get ready for the time between your briefing and when you get departing. If you're switching over to VFR Flight Plans, which once again, as a flight instructor in the room, I would always advocate anyone out there flying VFR, you get flight following services, and to file, activate, open, and close VFR Flight Plans to make sure that someone's out there looking for you in case you don't arrive to your destination. The great advantage here with integration to Lockheed Martin is the ability to activate and close your VFR flight plans directly from the app. This is something that ForeFlight does, which I think is just so neat. You get an opportunity literally to activate your flight plan. You no longer need to call over the VOR frequency to get flight service or the general flight service frequencies. You don't need to do any of that anymore. You can literally activate the flight plan on your app and then get it again closed when you get down. The only catch here is, remember, a lot of you are used to doing that in flight. Now you need to create a new habit, and you have to do it when you land. So whatever you do when you get out of the airplane, don't forget to go open the app again and close that flight plan, because we don't need anybody coming out looking for you when in fact you made your destination. For a little bit further on your flight training and flying along at night, there's a couple things that you need to be considering with a backlit device like the iPad. The screen brightness is going to be a big factor for making sure that you maintain your night vision capability. The apps have different features, or excuse me, the iPad itself, of course, you can dim the screen down, but the apps themselves, in most cases, also offer an additional dimming feature after you've lowered the iPad brightness to kind of help bring that screen brightness down even lower. And that's a real benefit, once again, trying to keep your night vision safe. Another neat one that is universal to the iPad, this is not specific to apps, is the ability to invert the colors on the iPad itself. It's a feature that you need to enable. It's in the settings there at the bottom under Settings, General, Accessibility, an accessibility shortcut. When you triple-click the home button, that'll actually invert the colors. More beneficial for some of the IFR charting, but that being said, still helpful to kind of help reduce some of that white space on several of the apps. As Bret had mentioned earlier, a big piece that we like to talk about is some form of home study course. Now here we have a picture, and we'll talk a little bit about the Sporty's Learn to Fly course app. And this is really talking about the power of these flight training courses and the information you're doing at home and the ability to carry it with you wherever you go. The Sporty's Learn to Fly course app not only integrates the famous video training that we have, but also a lot in terms of things that can help you directly with your flight training. Things like the flight maneuvers, an opportunity to study a procedure or visualize that maneuver before you go out in the cockpit with your flight instructor. I just can't preach enough about how important this is. I talk to all of our students. I write about this on blogs. If you want to save money in your flight training, you want to save money on your next flight review as you're moving forward in the instrument training, any of these procedures, you want to study on the ground before you meet with that flight instructor. That's going to allow you to kind of shave off a few of those minutes in the air, and every one of those minutes is dollars. So that's a real benefit. Of course, the Sporty's Learn to Fly course app has the integrated study buddy, the FAA knowledge test questions, practice tests, helping getting you ready for that written exam. And all this just translates to the ability to save a few dollars and time when it comes to being with your flight instructor, so we can dedicate our time in the cockpit to more meaningful ventures as we're working on experience-based learning. I talk a lot, too, about PTS, or Practical Test Standards criteria. This app also integrates to PTS study materials, so you know what's expected of you on that check ride. So that day that you get there for that check ride is not a surprise to you as to what the examiner or inspector is going to be looking for. And the great thing about it being on the iPad is you can take it anywhere with you. Everywhere from being home, but also taking it with you to the airport. If you're sitting there waiting for your flight instructor and you have some dead time, now's the time to pull out the app and keep studying. Some neat features have really come along lately. I'm just going to touch on these very, very briefly. You can look to your individual apps for information, but the ability to record your flight. Flight data recording is now integrated into most of the big apps. This one, once again, looking at for flight, and the ability to record your flight right in there and then play it back afterwards can be very helpful for you and your flight instructor to remember how things went on the flight. For example, after you have that information, you can export that right into Google Earth. The Google Earth app right there on the iPad, and it will show you your track in three-dimensional view. You can move around with it. Talk about a big wow factor, not only to be able to look at it that way, but also the opportunity to sit down and review the performance and flight criteria that you and your instructor did, or perhaps you on yourself practicing alone. The other thing I always like to talk with students about this, and this stuff's only been out for a little while now in this same capacity, is the ability to take these notes home with you. When you're looking at the flight recording and you're able to go back, it tends to help spark memories a little bit more. We all remember a few things when we walk away from our instructor. Oh, I need to do this differently next time. Oh, I need to remember to get that checklist down. Hopefully these kind of recordings are going to help spark that kind of a memory. There's even some dedicated apps out there. This particular one here is Cloud Ahoy, which is really kind of the leader as far as flight recording information from the flight training side. This app will actually not only record your data from that data course and then export into Cloud Ahoy, but it'll help you actually analyze your maneuvers. You can see there on the screen, talks about the altitude variation during a steep turn, airspeed variation, etc. And that really helps both you and your instructor review that performance. And that's where I find it in Sporty's Academy. We have some instructors that like to use the Cloud Ahoy app specifically for their students. If you're into seamless and you don't like to have to worry about hitting the button, the really neat thing for those of you looking at that Stratus 2 in-flight weather device, Stratus 2 has a dedicated built-in flight data recorder. This is something that works automatically when you turn the device on. You do not even need to have the iPad connected to it. You can just bring it with you, turn it on, it will record the flight, and then you can come back and get that information at a later date. Now switching gears a little bit into the instrument training, for those of you that are in instrument training or already have an instrument rating, instrument flying really isn't that different as far as VFR flying when using the iPad. I still advocate the same basic plan. Start with the basics. Go back to planning IFR cross countries with a traditional IFR and route chart. A, it's a little bit larger. You get to set it out on the table with the instructor. B, it's teaching you that original rudimentary method of how to do that so that information will be with you when you fly. And then later on, then you can integrate the iPad into weather retrieval, airport information, charts, etc. It really helps out down the road. As you're going with the instrument rating, the big advantage here, of course, is the approach chart display. That's what a lot of people are really looking for as far as the IFR world goes. The great thing is the digital charts are always up to date. They update automatically every 56 days. There's that big money savings. You're not having to change out those turf plates all the time. And there's a tremendous list of other benefits, and I'm just going to fly through these real quick. But here's a couple screenshots for you. During the instrument rating, the digital approach charts have a lot of interactive data, and that interactive really helps out in reducing some of the workload in the cockpit. For example, on the left there, there's a NOTAM that is popped up for that particular approach. This approach had a NOTAM, and when we did a flight briefing, it grabbed that NOTAM for us, and then as we loaded the approach plate, it went ahead and had a big red flag at the top saying, hey, look out, there's a NOTAM here. On the right-hand side, you get an opportunity, if you have certain subscription levels, to be able to have geo-referenced approach plates. If you've not heard the term geo-referenced, it just means that the approach plate, your aircraft can be on top of the approach plate and moving around to like an interactive map, so to speak. So it's kind of neat that you get a chance to see where you are. Big, big benefit in terms of situational awareness and terrain safety. The other thing which Bret had also mentioned for us is the ability to put this geo-referenced approach plate over top of another map. For example, here we have a GPS approach into Claremont County overlaid on the VFR sectional. It was a VFR day coming in on the backside of this rain, just kind of helped us get our bearings, and it's kind of a nice little feature to be able to have additional information, like radar information, over top of that approach plate. As you're doing some of that IFR flight planning, there's a real question that every instrument student starts to ask is, how can I plan my route to make ATC happy? If you've not encountered this yet, you're not yet at that point, you'll find out very quickly that sometimes whatever you wanted to file isn't what ATC wanted you to file. So a lot of the apps, particularly, once again, here's ForeFlight, gives you some examples of what ATC has cleared other airplanes for the exact same route. This just gives you a list of several other altitudes for those airplanes and what the route was that ATC cleared them, so you give an opportunity to do a little bit of shortcut work. If you file directly of your flight plans through Flight Service, as we've shown for both VFR, you can also do it for IFR, they have the opportunity, once you file that, if you have it in the system long enough, it will send a message back through your app, like here in ForeFlight, where it'll actually tell you what ATC is going to clear you for before you get your clearance. And it takes a lot of the shorthand writing and scribbling all of a sudden when you filed one thing and ATC decided to give you something else. This really cuts down on some of that confusion. Here's a little screenshot for you regarding the flight plan system. The real nice thing about having your flight plans filed digitally, the ability to have those recalled, not only for what did I file moments, but also the ability to refile the same flight plan again with updated information. If you're flying cross countries a lot, back and forth between the same airports, real benefit there obviously, but also for training flights, being able to be staying in the local area. Now on to the last big topic that I want to catch before the check ride, which is emergency considerations. How can the iPad help me in an emergency? Okay, well, here's the first one. Your iPad will not help you manage the emergency. You are the person in charge. You're the pilot in command. You're the person that's going to manage the emergency. The iPad is a source of data, nothing more. So when the time comes, if you're in an emergency, have that paper emergency checklist nearby. You don't need to be fumbling in the iPad trying to go and find the checklist app per se for the emergency, because you got to flip pages to find it. Have that emergency checklist nearby in that pocket right there at your side. If you do want to use the apps for emergency purposes, not the normals, but for emergencies, then have a dedicated app devoted specifically to that checklist. As I say to my students, you want to assess any situation that happens, emergency, urgency, or otherwise, in your mind. You don't want to plug it into a computer and ask for the computer to give you an analysis. You are far better at determining that for you. And then the device can give you the information you need. For example, here's a nice screenshot about how to find distance bearing to a nearby airport. All these features are built into these apps. It's a tremendous amount of information, very, very helpful. Specifically, as we're just talking about for diversion planning. how long is it going to take me to get there, how much fuel is it going to take, what bearing is it going to give me. That information is available readily at your fingertips in these apps. But be careful. It's just information. The pilot is still the one that's in charge of managing the situation. So as great as the iPad and all this technology is, you can't expect it to take care of everything for you. So put the iPad and the app in a box in terms of what can it do for you versus, yes, it could do that for me, but maybe I should be the one to do it instead. As I mentioned, with all this information comes the fear of information overload. Be careful not to be sucked into the device. Famous accident, of course, down in Florida of a transport category airplane, 3 pilots looking at a burned out landing gear light bulb, and the airplane crashed into Florida, killing everyone on board because 3 pilots were dedicated to look at a light bulb. And a light bulb's obviously a lot more simple than an iPad, so that can just go to show you what can happen with a check ride, with a distraction in the cockpit. Now, for those of you going, wow, this is very depressing, Dave, well, let's go on a little bit of an upside. Let's talk about how can we use this to pass our check ride, because not only do we want to go and use this every day, we want to use this for actually getting through in our check ride. The first thing, first and foremost, big red letter, when you schedule your check ride with either your designated pilot examiner or an FAA inspector directly, that is the time to discuss the use of this iPad. You want to let them know. Say, hey, Mr. Inspector, I have an iPad. Here's what I'd like to use it for. I'm going to have my flight plan on it. I'm going to have my POH in it. I'm going to have my FARs in it. Is that acceptable to you? If not, that's the time to have the discussion rather than the day of when they say, you know what, put that thing away, let's talk about this on paper, and then all of a sudden you have that panic moment. Be prepared, though, to discuss if they say, yes, this will work. Be prepared to discuss how it works. People are going to want to know that you're familiar with the technology, not just that you're using it as a crutch. Bret already hit on the big ones, but I won't allow any student at our academy to go into a check ride if they're not capable of talking about the legality of using that device. It's not that you need to defend yourself against an examiner or an inspector. It's the idea that you've done the research to know intelligently that, yes, this is approved, here are the limitations, if any, and I'm prepared with that information. Bret references advisory circulars. They are a very easy read. On the big day of the check ride, here it comes. We've got nervous, we've got check ride anxiety. Here it comes. Not a big deal, but here's the catch. That iPad, we don't want to over-rely on it. Once we show that that iPad is our crutch, it's going to be a big problem for the examiner. So it's just used as a source of information, not for anything else. I always say be prepared for, quote, when it breaks. This is because for any examiner or inspector, at some point or another, they're going to probably tell you that the GPS broke or the iPad went out of power or something happened to it. You must be prepared for that moment. They have to test this knowledge according to the PTS. So they might ask you, okay, we're 20 miles away from our next checkpoint. How long is it going to take us to get there? Oh, the iPad just broke. Did it? Okay, well, now you just need to do that via mental math. They're not trying to torture you. They're just trying to determine how you would handle the situation if it happened. After you get past the check ride, the iPad has so many benefits and features. It is going to allow you to file those flight plans, calculate the information, shorten up your flight planning in advance. And the goal here isn't necessarily to get things done, to shortcut things. It's more about how to be able to make use of that information safely and effectively, so that you're not encumbered by all the tedious paperwork and time that comes into that. I'm aware that we're over time, and I do apologize, but just to reference once again for some additional information, we do have our 2 blogs, the learntoflyhere.com, along with the iPad Pilot News. And as Eric mentioned at the beginning of the seminar, we also have our archived webinars on sporties.com/webinar, and I encourage you to check out the iPad 101 webinar, a fantastic one that Bret had put on previously that really dives in more specifically to the iPad itself into the cockpit. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor back over again to Mr. Eric Radke for an opportunity to see what questions we might have in the group.
David and Bret, thanks a lot. Tremendously insightful, a lot of positive feedback we've gotten as the presentation has been ongoing from many in our audience, and we still have many with us this evening, so thanks for sticking with us. Bret, in terms of questions, let me start with you if I could. You referenced electronic logbooks. Okay, that was the broad topic you talked about. Can you speak to how that information is protected, secured, stored, so that everyone can kind of feel good and safe about keeping their information there? And also, kind of as a second part to that, are there any legality issues associated with electronic logbooks?
Sure. From a backup standpoint, most of these applications will integrate with cloud-based services, so you can access the information on websites or on a dedicated desktop application. But as I do with my electronic logbook, I make backups of it. So from a very, very purely simple standpoint, you can export that data maybe on a weekly or monthly basis to a spreadsheet type format or a PDF type format, so that you have that data. And that can be imported into other programs as well. So let's say that you don't stick with a particular application for forever. You can export that data, like I said, monthly, and have it in a format to bring into other programs or applications. So I'd highly recommend doing that. Go above and beyond whatever the application does for security and its own backup, and store a copy yourself on some kind of interval basis. As far as legalities, yes, you're fine doing digital logbook. Again, I mentioned there's ways to do electronic signatures in the applications. If you wanted to, for your endorsements or particular instructor signatures, you could also have them sign a paper reference book also, if you want to have that in the purest essence of their signature, if you're really concerned about it. But yeah, perfectly legal to do electronic logbooks and store all your data, as long as you, more importantly, are meeting the accuracy and minimum time requirements required for your certificate or whatever rating you're going for.
Thanks, Bret. Dave, I'll present this one to you if you could. Some tips, I guess, just a few words of advice if you happen to be working with an instructor who is, I guess, less than accepting of the newer technology on the iPad, maybe less accepting of electronic charts versus paper. There's some things you can do or things you can say. What would you recommend in terms of dealing with that maybe somewhat awkward situation?
Well, that's an excellent question. I'm glad someone asked that. The best thing you can do here in terms of your flight training is to have that as an open discussion. Obviously, you've addressed that hopefully early on, and the key here hopefully was trying to find a flight school / instructor that ideally is embracing that technology. If they're not, and that's important to you, then the key here is to find to what confines the flight instructor is going to allow you to use that device. Sometimes some of the CFIs out there that don't like them are really more rooted in not understanding what the proper legality is. We've covered a lot of those topics today. If they're more concerned in terms of the, well, what if it breaks phenomena, that goes back to having the appropriate backups. And me personally, and I've talked to a lot of CFIs across the country, most of them are just really concerned to make sure that you have the proper paper knowledge. If you show your CFI that you have the ability to do these calculations using a manual E6B, or excuse me, an electronic E6B and a paper chart, or using the sectional to do the measuring, most of them are going to get right on board with you. They just want to make sure that you're a well-rounded pilot and you have that capability moving forward.
Thanks, Dave. We'll make this our last question, and Bret, I'm going to pose this one back to you. A lot of people asking, I guess you to just maybe recap your preferences or recommendations. We have a lot of small airplane folks on with us, obviously. iPad Air versus iPad Mini.
Sure. Again, at the end of the day, I think it really depends, A, on your eyesight. How good your vision is. Do you want to have the bigger screen is another consideration you want to think about there, to have the charts display larger, text larger. And with that consideration, remember, just about any chart you can pinch to zoom in on. So if you're looking at an approach chart and on the iPad mini, let's say that might fit in the airplane, but you're concerned about the size of the screen being too small, remember at all times you can zoom in on any aspect of that chart to make the letters very large and much easier to read. So my natural inclination, if you're on the fence, A, go to a store and put both in your hands and feel the weight of them. But with the iPad Air, has really come down in both the thickness and the total weight itself. But in my experience, the iPad Mini is a sure thing. It's going to work just about anywhere. So if you are concerned, I would go that route. And the bonus there is you're saving about $100 also. It's a less expensive product. So if there is any concern at all, I would say lean towards the iPad Mini. Screen's plenty big enough, and it's a nice size to take with you as you travel. But for those in the Skyhawks, again the 152, the Cessna products, which is probably the most common training airplane out there, my preference there is the full-size iPad. Again, it fits well on an e-board, on your lap, or on a yoke mount. So either model there, but again, I think if you want to play the safe bet, go with the iPad Mini and save some money on it also.
Great. With that, and Dave mentioned we're a little bit over our time, so we'll cut things off now. There's definitely some questions we weren't able to get to. Let me point out on your screen right now, you are seeing contact information directly for both David and Bret, B. Koebbe and D. Zitt respectively at sporties.com. If you're not able to jot that down or come back to the video, you can always reach us also at fly@sporties.com. and we'll be happy to get those messages to the appropriate places. Once again, let me thank you on behalf of Bret and David and the entire Sporties team for joining us tonight and staying with us. We very much hope you enjoyed the content. We do hope you'll check back with us, sporties.com/webinars, not only for the video archive of tonight's presentation, but also for a look at all the upcoming topics we have. We have a packed programming all throughout 2015, so we do hope to see you on another presentation very soon. Thanks again for joining, and have a great evening.